Hello everybody and welcome to tonight's debate. Thank you all very much for coming. I wasn't sure whether we'd have 5 or 500, so I think we got a good compromise in between. My name is Professor Cillian Ryan. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor International, and you will already have gathered from my accent that I'm not from around here. So I guess by definition I'm global. I think this Global Week is really, really important. There are very few of us, even now, never mind the future, who will not work in a global environment in some way or another. If we're working for a purely UK-based firm, we're inevitably going to be in competition with somebody else, unless we're a British politician when we have no competition except the judges. If we're working for an international company, we'll have to be able to understand the different people that we work with and the different cultures they come from. But many of us will live and work in an environment which requires us to travel abroad and meet and know other people. So I think it's really important that we get to understand other perspectives of the world. So it's my great pleasure to chair tonight's debate, which I hope is going to be a bit like question time. I've got 1 or 2 questions to get the panel going, but then I'll welcome questions from the audience or spot votes, as unscientific as that may be. Okay, so I'm going to start at the far end and ask Damian to introduce himself.
My name is Damian Smith. I'm from Nottingham. I campaigned to leave the European Union in June and have been a UKIP member for 3 years.
My name is Zsófia Nagy. I'm from Hungary, and I haven't participated in any political activity, and I guess I'm rather conservative views with some liberal influences.
My name is Luke. I'm a conservative, as evil as they may be. And I've been involved in a political sphere for many years now. I talk with MPs in my local constituencies. I've been on district councils. And my views as being a liberal conservative are a bit more open than some of the traditional colloquialisations you have with the Conservative Party.
Hello, my name is Sara, and I'm a student of international business. But I'm very interested in politics as well. And I am the secretary of the Amnesty International Society of the university. I would define myself as left-wing, very left-wing. And yeah, we'll be in general speaking about in favor of openness.
I'm Max. I'm a social democrat from Germany. I'm studying here as an exchange student, and I agree with the idea of a unified Europe.
Hi. I'm Neiry. I'm the campaigns officer for the IR and Politics Society. I'm an immigrant and a socialist. I went to the refugee camp called the Jungle in November. I did some work there with the NGO. I would have voted Remain, but I don't have a British passport, so I can't vote.
Okay, so the first question I have on the list is that says the number of racially or religiously aggravated offences recorded by the police after the Brexit referendum in July 2016 was 41% higher than in July 2015, as reported in the Home Office report of hate crime, England and Wales. Long question, I didn't write it. Would you agree or disagree that the referendum vote to leave is linked to the rise of a tacit consent regarding racism and xenophobia in Britain? So I'm going to start with Damian on the far right there. Not by coincidence, I guess, on the far right.
Okay, hold it. Well, most of us are doing the researching and Politics&IR module at the moment. Over the past few weeks, we've been learning about the importance of manipulated statistics. This is one of them, because what it did, it took 2 separate months, which obviously allows for anomalies, things like that. If you actually look at the Home Office statistics, the general trend of hate crimes, it goes up steadily. 2011 to 2012, 35,994. You can all check this on your phones, by the way. 35,845 in 2013, 2014, 37,575. And it goes up 2015, 2016, 49,419. So this 41% figure was used by the BBC, Independent, Huffington Post, Metro, the Financial Times, absorbed but through osmosis by everyone in the audience, I'd imagine. But as I've demonstrated here, I think you can see that the statistic itself is nonsense, and thus the question can't really be accurately responded to.
Okay, so Neiry, would you take this up? I mean, aside from the actual figures? I mean, there is a sense, at least, that there have been some incidents related to the post-Brexit environment.
You can't not acknowledge the coloration, at least, of Trump winning presidency and the Brexit vote. It allows for a society that is more tolerant of these views, although it shouldn't be, but it gives these people spaces to spew hatred and racism and xenophobia and all of these things. Do you not agree to that? It's not that it's just been going on throughout the years, but Brexit facilitated these things.
I'll come back to people. I want to give everybody a chance first, so maybe as...
And just as you said, regardless of what the exact figures are, I think that we can all agree that the hate attacks have increased, not only in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States. And this is something that we should be very worried about. And definitely, I think that when you're seeing the political leaders are being racist themselves, when they are not using political correct words, when they are themselves let's say, demonizing a certain group of people, for sure, people will feel that they have the justification to behave in this way. So, yeah, for sure, I think that there is a correlation that we should be very careful about, very conscious about, and think about all the negative impact that it's having and will have in the near future.
I'll come to Luke first, and I'll come to you, okay? Luke.
On the question of tacit consent, I don't think it's given tacit consent. I think there is a general trend of rise, as has been noted out. I believe that it is a despicable offence to attack somebody over their race, their creed, their colour. I think it is a disgusting thing. But this general trend, if you look at it subjectively, if you point the rise of racism simply at one or two aspects in a world stage, then it gives a view that isn't necessarily indicative of the entire picture. If you blame everything on Brexit, I mean, people can blame not getting tea for 20 pence higher is on Brexit. KFC has said they might have to charge more because of Brexit. If you need to look at the general trend of what people are saying instead of indicting it on what people agree or disagree with, is how I feel about it. I don't think Brexit is the main reason for it. I think it is just the world is slowly becoming more intolerant.
Max.
Hello? Yeah. Well, I think the general problem of it is once right-wing groups are successful in an election, Brexit, Donald Trump, those right-wing groups feel encouraged to express their attitudes even more. We saw that in the USA, as you already said. Within the first 10 days after Trump got into office, there were 900 hate incidents in the USA that were explicitly referred to Donald Trump or his slogans.
Zsófia.
I understand your point that the statistics are quite tricky and one should consider the role of media, but I do think that the number of assaults is increased, but this question is too complex because I guess that this fear generates violence and this violence ends in a form of hate crime.
Okay, okay, go ahead, Damian. Let you respond, then I'll follow up. Go ahead.
What about speaking? Yeah. Also, another problem with the statistic is we're a lot of hearsay, but the population between 2015 and 2016 increased by 500,000. That's the Home Office estimate. So it would only really be a rise if the population figures were static, as it were. So I think any sort of, as we've heard, the only comments that can really be made are mostly hearsay, general feeling, personal feelings, which I don't think, it's not really serious discussion, really, is it? In my mind, anyway.
As a moderator. I'll come back to the front in a second. I just want to pick up on the comment about Trump, because, Luke, you said you thought the world was generally becoming less tolerant. And obviously Trump had his thing about banning Muslims and now has selected particular states. Do you think this reflects a general trend for intolerance? Like you just pick up on that theme.
So hate crime is increasing. There are being attacks on the LGBT community increasing in America. There are attacks on Muslims, obviously, in America. There has been an increase in the intolerance of nearly every minority group in one form or another. I'm not just talking about walking down the street and spouting racial nonsense or religious nonsense against the LGBT communities. I'm talking about a wider picture. I have a friend back home where I live, and he is a Hindu. He's a friend of the family of many, many years, before my birth. And he is currently having a veto from members in the area where he lives, because he owns a shop. They're having a veto because they believe he is a Muslim, and he isn't. So it is affecting groups that it shouldn't be affecting anyway, this intolerance. It's the claws of it are reaching further and further away, whether people realize it or not. And we can't let that happen. We need to speak up about it.
Question here in the front. Go ahead. Or a comment? Wait till the microphone comes to you.
Sorry. So we agree then that the panel agrees that there is an increase,
yes.
Except -1 on this side here. I think it's concerning that basing those figures on an increase from a previous year because of immigration has no bearing on a general hate or concern of some kind of phobia against race, creed, or your sexuality and whatsoever. The panel generally agrees that there is an increase of hate crime.
I think there's a general increase, but I don't think it's due to Brexit, which is what the question centralises on.
They'll come to you in a second. Just let them finish.
It's a rise that is world over. It's not just in England. You have the rise of Le Pen in France. You have Gerhard Wilders in the Netherlands. There's a rise where there's more right-wing parties, like further right-wing parties, gaining much, much more popularity than they ought to. So I think labelling it on Brexit is just singling out one thing in a much, much bigger picture.
Neiry, go ahead.
Hello. I think it's concerning that you keep saying don't blame Brexit when it is one of the most important votes that this country has seen.
I haven't said don't blame Brexit.
Well, hold up. And the campaign that you voted in pro-Brexit used immigration as the most thing in regarding to leaving Europe. So how can you say there's no correlation whatsoever? It is there in plain facts.
If you hear me, if you listen to what I said in full, I said that I don't think you should label Brexit as the sole reason. It is obviously a reason. It is wrong to say it's not. But blaming the main rise in hate crime simply because of Brexit is being ignorant of the bigger picture.
No,
that's what I am
course,
explaining.
it goes beyond Brexit. But to say that it's not just to simplify, I think you're simplifying it because it has at least made it worse than what it was before, and that you need to acknowledge for.
Guys, some people are dominating, so Sara wants to come in. Sara.
Yes, I wanted to say that I agree with Luke, partly, saying that Brexit is only the symptom of this general rise in right-wing movements and this general rise in people precisely not wanting free movement of people. The same happens with Trump's ascension to presidency. It is only symptoms that are showing where the society is moving towards. And what I would like to know, and I think this is the probably most important thing to try to answer during this debate, is why is this happening? Why are people every time moving away from openness more and more? Why have people like Trump raised to power? Why has Brexit happened? What are the causes that have made the people feel so unhappy about their situation that they have decided to go to this very often extreme ways? And this is something that I believe we should focus on. I have got my personal opinions about it and my personal theory, and I do believe that there is a very high inequality in our society. And every time more and more, people feel powerless. Very often they feel ignored by the politicians. So then someone comes up with an idea, someone who promises change, someone who is, let's say, daring in some things, for example, Trump, being very clearly non-politically correct and things like that. Someone who say, oh yes, this person has got guts, this person will lead the change. But actually, these people are probably often these people that have risen as a consequence of this discontentment in society, were targeting and blaming the shame on some other things. So, in my opinion, the reason for the rising inequality is the rising power of multinational companies, of top business owners, top earners, and the elites in general. We believe that is a problem. It is not the problem that immigrants are coming and they are the ones to blame. It is actually this system of where every time more and more people are left behind in the middle class and in the working class. And every time smaller elite controls everything, controls the media, controls politics, controls businesses and economy in general.
Okay, there's someone here at the back wants to come in, so let's come to you.
Hi, just wanted to ask that you were talking about hate crimes, but hate crimes have been increasing under Liberal administrations as well. So, for example, when you look at race
Sorry,
relations...
we're having difficulty hearing him here.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah,
Hello.
try that again.
Okay, so basically, hate crimes have been increased under Liberal administrations as well. So, for example, you look at race relations under Obama, they weren't particularly rosy. So why do you think the left has failed to deal with hate crimes as well? And also, don't you think that maybe because there's a distinction between reported hate crimes? So, for example, maybe hate crimes have been increasing because they've been reported more because people feel more comfortable as well. But basically my question is, why do you think the left has failed as well? It was very progressive in 2008 when Obama was elected as the first African-American president, but when you look at the Black Lives Matter at the end of his administration, you know, everything hasn't been rosy even under his administration.
Yeah, I guess sometimes you feel there's so much violence in the US, how could they tell, you know? Damian, you wanted to come in.
I was just going to say earlier, it's not really that relevant anymore because we've moved on, but it was... if there is this general rise that everyone keeps talking about, why are all the media statistics fiddled? Because there wasn't just the 41%, there was the 57%, which was picked from a very small, underused website where reports of hate crimes can be submitted. They're not reviewed or anything like that. I could submit one, make it up, and it was the figures were something like, I think it went 43 hate crimes, and it went up to 83. In after the referendum, the end of July, and that's what's that? 31. I think it was 31 more hate crimes. This is 31. This is a very small collection we're working with here. You can't assess anything from that. But the media will continue to say it is and misrepresent it all they can.
Okay, I'd like to move the debate on now, given that the theme is the open world, and really to ask the panel. Do we have obligations towards refugees from war-torn areas? And obviously I'm particularly thinking of the Syrian refugees who have come to Europe this year. So do we have responsibilities? Let's start with Neiry here.
Yes, if we want to campaign to bomb Syria, we have to deal with the responsibilities of our actions.
Luke, do you want to come in on this?
Yes,
Yep.
I do. I want to know that if people are so dreadfully unhappy in their country, so dreadfully tormented by war, I want to know that they will have a safe place somewhere in the world, wherever that may be, not just in England, around the world. So I do believe we have an obligation to help refugees.
Zsófia, did you want to? Paul.
Yeah, I do think that we are, as a part of the international community, we are responsible for them. I just don't believe that how they try to carry it out, the forced immigration could work, the policy. That's all.
Max?
It's clearly our duty to help refugees. It's humanitarian responsibility as a Western society where we share maybe the most open values in the world. We have to do it, but on the other side, we also have to consider how to solve the crisis in Syria, for instance. And this is, from my point of view, this can't be solved with soldiers. We have to consider an embargo of guns, of weapons, of arms, and an economic one.
Damian, do you want to come in on this?
Speaking for Britain mainly here, I'd just like to point out something I think is a little bit of a hypocrisy. Is people like myself and a lot of people that wanted to leave the European Union were always mocked for saying our country was better than it was, saying that we wanted to return to the old days of the British Empire, all this sort of nonsense. But I think it's rather convenient that when a cause that fits, say, a liberal left cause, suddenly there's a little bit more money down the back of the sofa than they said there was before. If you see what I'm saying.
Right, so I'm still a little unclear. Are you saying that we should be making efforts to accommodate Syrian refugees?
I think the refugees that should be prioritised should be the ones that sought refuge in the first peaceful country, not ones that tried to jump the queue by going all the way to France. I don't see how that's fair, for one. And frankly, I don't think if I think some people on the panel might want to take in a lot more than what the government's proposing to do, which I think is about 3,000. I can't remember the figure. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, no one knows. But to take in a lot, what's the current deficit? There's a £1.2 million housing deficit for one. What am I talking about? Yeah. So I don't see how Britain, at least, because I think some of the rest of Europe could, but I don't think Britain can really house them and help them perspire.
Okay, I'm going to come to Sara, and then I think I saw a hand up here in the audience, so let's come to Sara.
Well, I just think that the situation is that people are being killed, people are being bombed, children,
yeah,
and
not
families
in Europe.
are suffering.
The refugees in Europe aren't being killed, though, are they? Because it's peaceful in Europe at the moment.
Okay, we still have got the responsibility as humanity to stand together against these horrible crimes and help these people who need it. And I really agree with Max saying that it's not only about bringing in refugees and integrating them. Obviously, we couldn't. That is not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is clearly the Syrian war. These people wouldn't want to leave their home countries and their families behind if there wasn't this horrible war going on. So this is the thing that we should mainly focus on. But as long as there is a war, before we can actually help to settle this war and bring peace again in that country, during this time people are dying, people are in danger, and it is our duty, our moral duty, I believe, particularly as a developed country that has got the resources to do so, to welcome refugees.
Question here in the audience. I guess we've got another one over here then. We'll take a couple of questions from the audience, then we'll go back to the panel.
Yeah, so we're talking about refugees, but so the statistics, whatever I saw on BBC, says that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran have not really taken in any refugees from Syria. Well, barely. I don't even know. Why do you think that is? Like, I don't know, we're talking about taking in refugees, supporting them, helping them in every way possible. And these countries, these strong Gulf countries that are allies with the US as well, yeah, most of them. Yeah, why have they not taken in any refugees, especially when they're so close by? Lebanon has, Palestine can't, but yeah, people have tried.
Okay.
Well, particularly now that you're mentioning Saudi Arabia, for example, this country clearly hasn't got human rights at the top of their agenda. So we understand that it's not their top priority to bring in refugees. We think that definitely countries that are nearby should also give a hand, particularly because simply they are closer and people need this help. But, well, the reason why you're asking why they haven't taken in is because the regimes in these countries are very much against human rights. So they are not going to care about refugees in general.
Sorry,
They're not going to make the effort.
There's a lady over here who wants to, and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to go on Damian's point where he said why it's not fair that the refugees are coming to France. I think if you put the shoe on the other foot and you had the choice of going to Jordan or coming to the UK or France, where would you go? Why should we put all the strain on countries that are closer to Syria, like Jordan, where 67% of the refugees living there live in poverty, Who wants to live in poverty? They've come from war. And you yourself just said, no refugees are dying in Europe. Yeah, they are not, because they're safe in Europe. Why would you stay in a country with fear when Europe and a place where you can offer safety for the refugees?
Because I have a lot more...
Let's try and keep an order, so give everybody a chance. So I said Neiry was going next. Then I'll come back to you.
Selma has a good point. Working in France with refugees, I noticed that no matter how many barriers you put on them, they want to cross the border into the UK because it is the only place they are safe in because of laws that protect them. And yeah, like Sara said, Saudi Arabia, regarding their human rights, is not really a place that you would want to go.
I didn't say send them to Saudi Arabia. I said
she gave an
the ones in the
example
first
that you
European
need.
countries that they came to.
Time, I'll tell you what, because it's very hard for me to hear if there's two people talking.
Hear you.
I'll let her finish, then I'll come to you, okay? Thank you.
Working in Calais, if you don't know, the UK is actually building a wall in Calais that is £1.5 million. That stops refugees going through security or in their... but it's not stopping people from illegally crossing. And again, you cannot criminalize these people when they are literally fleeing unimaginable situations that you would yourself do anything to get out of.
Forcing the border between European countries and throwing firebombs is not fleeing war. That's fleeing a peaceful country to another peaceful country.
But if you look at the reports, it was actually the police who started the violence against them because they were there in peace. If you literally look, I'm not even lying.
All the footage suggests otherwise.
But you've both interjected now.
A reporter kicked a refugee.
Oh, time out. Both are interjecting. Let's try and control the level of the debate. So I think we've had an interesting point about whether we should or should not take refugees. I think the question I'd like to ask, various people said we have to do things to protect them. Nobody seems to disagree on that. I think what we seem to be disagreeing is how we distribute them. So I guess the question I'd like to ask the people on the panel, first of all, is what criteria should we use to decide how many a country or each country should take? In other words, should we distribute them globally? Should we distribute them across Europe? Should we distribute them in the region? Do we use population as a share? Do we use income? What do we use? So let's start. I'll start with you, Max, and then I'll come to Zsófia. So.
From my point of view, we need equal distribution of refugees because some countries in the European Union, the Netherlands, Germany, can take huge advantage of refugees because their economies require more employees and that will increase in the future, whereas other countries like Greece, Italy and Spain are facing huge problems in view of refugees because their social systems and their financial systems are highly overworked. So we need to share the refugees, which includes also Eastern Europe, that we can afford and care for an appropriate integration of those people.
Zsófia.
Yes, I agree with Max that we should keep in mind not to enforce the already existing problems in the countries. So we should consider about the economy of the countries and the places.
Damian.
I didn't really have anything to say, really. So what I need to say.
I think that if we have the amount in terms of financially to support and aid rebels in these countries, whether it's by arm or anything else, then we should put that amount.
Most of those rebels are extremists, though, aren't they? That's what the intelligence has found out.
Damian, hang on a second. A minute ago you said you didn't have anything to say, and now you're interrupting, right?
It's okay.
So let's try and manage this in a sensible way.
You do know that we did arm and fund rebels in Syria that ended up becoming ISIS. Yeah. Okay, so we instead of arming any rebel, any group, how about we put that money into diplomatic means and actually help people like refugees rather than fighting it physically?
There isn't a stable government that you can't distribute aid properly.
Yeah,
I think
but
we might
if
have to go to a position where I signal and you put on the microphone. Okay. So let's continue.
Yeah, my point overall was if we have money to bomb Syria or invade Iraq illegally, we should have money to sustain these people here in safety and peace.
Thank you. I'm going to
the European nations are all in debt, though, aren't they? So we don't have the money.
Can we control that microphone, if you don't mind? Damian, I will give you a chance. I'm moving around the panel, but I'm trying to give everybody their say. If one person keeps interjecting, that's unfair, isn't it? So, Luke, can I come to you next, please?
On the matter of how we should help them. Of course we should help them, and we should take our fill. I don't think we should say we'll take 15 people and that's our lot. But we also need to remember is that if we haven't got the facilities, which we currently haven't, to take as many as other countries can, then in a way they're going to be not living the life we want them to live. So we have the housing deficit. We are very, very slow on building houses at the moment. The facilities, we have the healthcare, we have it there and it's able to be used. We have benefit systems, they are there and able to be used. But we haven't currently got the houses to support the amount if we distribute equally. Until that, I say we have to say, well, we can take this, we'll take quotas, so until we can support the amount of people that we would want to take in.
Sara?
If I can reply to that. Well, the United Kingdom is one of the richest nations in the world in general. So if you're saying that the United Kingdom doesn't have got the resources and the facilities...
I'm not saying fiscally.
Okay, but in any case, I think that even any facility, even if it's housing, will be better than the current shelters they are living in where they are trapped in Greek islands. And I think that anything that we can offer them is more than they currently have. So we should definitely not say, well, we need time, we need to solve our own problems first, particularly because it is one of the, we are already in a very, very privileged situation, all of the European countries, much more than any of the refugees are in their home countries. So definitely we do have the means and we do have the resources. These people are not so many in numbers if distributed more or less equally. If a country is willing to take more and has got more resources, like for example Germany has made a huge effort to welcome refugees, then that is great, but that still shouldn't put the other countries, because we probably do have enough to help them.
Okay, there are some questions in the audience, but Damian, do you want to come in here?
I'd just like to ask the panel if any of them have the figures, the government estimates for the UK at least, on how much it would actually cost the British government to house the 3,000 refugees that are proposed to move here. Does anyone know the actual amount, the fiscal amount?
I don't study economics.
150 million pounds. I don't study economics either.
Perfect. Okay, so let's wait till we get to the microphone. So we'll come to this lady at the back, then we go gentleman over here, and then we're back to this lady at the front for a second bite.
I just have a few things to say, just in reply to that. You said that the figures were distorted anyway at the beginning, so how are you presenting figures that could be distorted? I can't hear you.
Is it working now? Yeah. These are the official figures that were used on question time, and as far as I can see, these are well, maybe, but as far as I can tell, the figures are accurate. These are estimates anyway, so.
But did you take the figures yourself?
Well, these are the Home Office figures. I don't work in government, do I?
You said the Home Office figures earlier were distorted, so these ones could be too.
One voice, don't shout it down, let her finish.
Moving on from that anyway, because we can't trust obviously what you just said, because they could be distorted. If you can't deal, if England or America or any of the countries that can't deal with their actions when they have bombed these countries, they have caused these crises of people, if they can't deal with the repercussions of their actions, maybe they should question the action in which they're making to cause these crises. It's not about the fact that we've got money, we need to sort this out. No. This is a humanitarian problem. This is not a race problem. This is a human problem that we need to take control of and sort ourselves. If we can't look after people that we've caused harm to, who are we to set an example to the rest of the world? Nothing is in place also. My last comment is, when the refugees do come to this country throughout the thousands and millions of years in every country in this world where refugees have existed because of crisis, there's nothing implemented in this country for refugees. Very, very minimal for language skills, them going back into education because they might be in university in Syria. People don't think about these things when they're saying, oh, just refugees, yeah. But they actually have careers, education and things like that. But because we haven't set these things up in this country, like, we need to focus on them things. We don't need to focus on distributing to a different country.
Thank you. We've this gentleman over here, and then we'll come back. We've got a lady here, and then I've got this gentleman here. And then we'll go back to the panel.
This is to Max. Given the rise of the AfD in Germany, to what extent would you say that Merkel's decision for 1 million migrants was a political mistake?
So, okay, can I just hold that question and just pick, are these comments on what we'll be talking about up to now? And you comment as well? And then I'll come back to your questions. Is that okay? Let's do that, so. This lady here.
Going off what Luke said, that we cannot facilitate all these refugees, I'm pretty sure Jordan didn't plan on facilitating 1.4 million refugees, and they're not living in mansions, no, they're living in shelters, but these are humans, and we need to help these people. We can't just take 60 refugees because that's all we can facilitate. Like, no one planned to take on this many, but we have to do it. We have to take sacrifices ourselves for these refugees.
Thank you. This man here?
There's a general trend in the West of self-shame and self-guilt over the state of the Middle East. When are we going to hold responsible Iran for the current crisis in the Middle East, for supporting Bashar al-Assad, who's butchering his own people, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the current crisis in Yemen? We're having a famine, and Iran have stoked the Yemen crisis up. Iran has its control of Iraq, and it's stoking up crisis in Bahrain and East Saudi Arabia. When are people going to hold a moral responsibility for Iran for the problems in the Middle East?
We have allies like Saudi Arabia, UK, so why are we not morally held responsible for being friends with these nations also? Because that means we're facilitating the violation of human rights.
Okay, we'll come back to the question at the back there about the F&D. Right?
Yeah, given the rise of the AfD in Germany, to what extent was Merkel's decision about taking 1 million migrants a political mistake?
Well, the AfD seems to be quite special because Germany hadn't had a right-wing party for the last 70 years. However, it covers only 10% of people who are going to the election. The other 90% are still agreeing with Merkel. So it might be a special situation now, but I think it's not a problem in general.
Does anybody else on the panel want to pick up on that issue?
To what you just said, well, this last word, perhaps you didn't exactly mean it in this way, but I do believe that we should not totally try to shut up those right-wing movements, because this will probably only make them more angry and more rage. But definitely, there are a little portion of the society that we should listen to them, because they're also people in the society that have got the right to say. But still, this shouldn't change the position that the state has got. A state that stands for human rights, a state that that stands for progress, should not fall under the demands of such a small group of extremists.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and it's just a really special situation for Germany. We took 1.5 million refugees by now, and the AfD might do well now, but no one knows what's going to happen in the next 10 years here, so maybe it decreases. Okay,
I've got to shift a little bit now. I'm a trade economist, so I'm interested in trade and trading issues, but I've also been involved in negotiations in different parts of the world. I guess what I'd be interested in the kind of post-Brexit scenario, where we're trying to negotiate free trade agreements with various countries, at what point do we start to balance issues of human rights versus trade? And, if we think of any country outside Europe and the Western world, there's probably an issue of human rights of some form in virtually every one of these countries. Would anybody like to pick up that issue? What's the appropriate balance? Free trade at any cost? Or we're not going to deal with regimes whose human rights record we dislike?
I find this question very interesting indeed. But I think that, yes, we should have a lot of trade agreements, but it should be fair trade agreements. Agreements in which we know that we're not having cheaper goods only because children are producing them or because people in really bad working conditions are producing them. But I think that here there is a very important role of the consumers, because it is the consumers that through their purchasing decisions are continuing to perpetuating this system. Every time we decide to go to a cheap store, every time you decide to go to Primark, every time you decide to buy something made in Bangladesh, made in China, you will know that you are contributing to these things. So I think that in addition to the free trade agreements and the agreements that in general the states does, it is very important that the consumers also and the populations are more aware about where the products that they are buying come from and trying to make more responsible choices and more responsible decisions in their everyday lives.
Luke, would you like to come in and sort of give us a Conservative Party view on this?
Well, as most of us in this room already know, Theresa May has already mentioned about changing sections of the European Court of Human Rights legislation. This isn't she's going to rip up the book and make it white supremacy and all this. She wants to adapt it to make it easier for British government. So, for example, when we had the trouble getting terrorists out of this country, and it took nearly 5 years to do so because of the European Court of Human Rights said he has a right to be here. Personally, I disagree with that. I want to make sure I know we're not harbouring terrorism, and we need to stand up against it. But I don't agree that there should be a complete rewrite of the book. Human rights is very important to us as beings. The standard basics of what it means to be a human in a civilised area. The unfortunate part about it is, if you look across the world, a lot of the places haven't reached that stage of civilization. There is still much inequality in the world, in certain countries. So if you specify to make it a British, what it means to be a British citizen, what the standard of living is in Britain, what the rules you abide by in Britain, it's more tailored to suit Britain. If you just immediately say, oh, X, Y, and Z because the French want to come, then you're not tailoring to British way of life, which I think is important. Being British to me is an important part of my life. So tailoring human rights to support that, to me, is a good thing.
Okay. Would somebody who's not from Britain like to comment on the concept of Britishness and how important it is?
Personally, I do not feel British. What is British to me? I think it's a complex issue. One, I do not carry a British passport, so nationally I cannot even claim it. I think there are very interesting things culturally that bind us together. I agree, and I feel that with the nation that I'm from. So to a point, I get what you mean by Britishness, but I think it's a very alienating things to other people at the same time, especially with colonialism and the mass history that involves nations together.
Zsófia, maybe I could ask, what's your sense of national identity and how important is it to you?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
What is your sense of national identity and how important is it to you?
National identity is quite important for me, as I'm from Hungary, in a monocultural state. But I also said that human rights are more important than trade agreement. Yeah.
Max, did you want to come in on that?
I feel European, to be honest. In Germany, national identity is not as important as in other countries, I guess. And for me, the common European values are essential and not necessarily national views.
Damian, do you have a view? I guess on both
British
issues,
identity.
Since we've come up onto the nationalism, on that one of identity, but also to come back to that notion of trade and who we trade with.
It's too early to say, really, because Theresa May and the Tory party say a lot of things. They've got a history of saying things and not doing them, so a bit too early to say. Your national identity point, I think, at the moment, I don't think anybody from Britain can claim to have a solid identity with a set of values because they change it all the time. As long as mass immigration, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, by the way, but as long as mass immigration continues and values have to be changed and altered and incorporating different cultures, it's very hard for anyone, I think, really to actually pinpoint down what Britishness is. We might be able to talk about it was 70, 80 years ago, maybe, but at the moment it's just changing constantly, so hard to say.
Does anybody have a view? I mean, if we look at countries like, we could take the US, but obviously we've got, let's just focus more on Canada and Australia, because that might be slightly less controversial than the US. Do you have a sense of how they build their sense of identity as Canadians or Australians, despite the fact they are largely immigrant communities? Somebody want to pick up on that?
Well, if I answer to this question, I'm honestly surprised. I really don't understand how it is possible that now, in Australia, the National Day is the day where they invaded that country. So they are celebrating the day in which they entered into that country and started a period of long slavery and suffering for the native people in there. So honestly, I think that every time more and more, I think that in general nationalism is a very toxic thing and can lead to very, very bad problems. And in a way where we're moving to, it makes every time less and less sense to speak about national identity. Me, myself, I am an example of that. I am half Spanish and half German. My father's German, my mother's Spanish. Should I have any particular identity? I think that the world is now an open place. So people are moving a lot. People are living in other countries. So every time it is less realistic to speak about a national identity. And I think it's the first time that I agree on this debate with Damian when he was saying that it would be really hard to define what it is. What is this British essence nowadays?
I'll come to the question in the back in a second, but I just want to ask, I've got two questions to the back, but I just want to have one of those typical question time polls. So how many people, given the choice, would opt for a UN passport over a British passport, or their home country, wherever that might be? So how many people would prefer to have a UN passport or their home country passport? Hands up those who would like a UN passport. I can't hear, sorry.
I can't.
Pardon?
Veto power.
Veto power, and you're giving a UN. Guess a UN passport would just be a recognition of your identity. Okay? How many people would always want to have their national passport? How many people have ever considered the question before? How many? That's interesting. And I suppose the last one I'll ask is how many people would like a European passport? Ah. That's interesting, because many more people would like a European passport than a UN passport. Something that's worth reflecting on. Okay, so we got a question. I'll come to this question here first, because this lady hasn't spoken, and then I'll come to you, okay?
I was just going back to British values. Historically, Britain has always had open door policies, right from the Mayflower, so on, blah, blah. Is that not part of our identity? The idea of, if you can't pinpoint what is Britishness, the fact that we have always accepted other cultures, always, from drinking tea, which is Indian, to anything that, and I just find it very interesting that there's this idea of Britishness and what it means to be Britain, when historically, if anyone needs help, the Jewish during World War II, so on and so forth, why has that changed now? What makes us British is the fact that we are open to other people and have always been. So,
Britishness to me is driving a German car to an Indian restaurant to sit on Swedish settees, to go home and watch telly on a Japanese telly. It is a multicultural view that I take, but if I don't mean like being white British. To me, Britishness is separate to being British. It's a very difficult thing for me to explain. I agree with immigration. I agree with multiculturalism. I have a lot of friends from a lot of different countries around the world. But if you come, if I go, for example, I have Irish and German heritage. I'd feel less Irish in Ireland than I do in England. But then again, I've been to Germany. I feel more Irish in Germany than I do in Ireland. So it's just a matter of schematics, really. It is a world view, but it's just, I'm proud to be that person.
I'll come to this lady here. Go ahead then. Yeah.
I'd like to call out Luke on I have this so-and-so friend, so I can't be racist. Sorry, but it doesn't work like that. A lot of people have people from many different backgrounds that they call friends, but they will generally tell you that they believe Britain should be white and British, full stop. So equating, I'm not being rude, but I'm trying to understand, as an immigrant, equating Britishness as openness can be a false consciousness. Let me just tell you that, because not everyone is open to immigrants or people from racial backgrounds. You can see this in the history of Britain. When Jamaicans came over here, although the borders were open, they were very discriminated against. And I don't think we should forget that.
I don't think we do. It is a very subjective view that you take there. It can be interpreted a million ways, and I'm sure everybody in this table would have a different interpretation of what being X, Y, or Z is. So how I feel about things might be different to how somebody in the audience would feel about being British, even if they do believe they are British or English or anything like that.
Okay, Neiry, I'll come back to you in a minute. This lady's been waiting patiently for some time, so I want to get to her.
I was just thinking as well what you said, Luke, actually. I'll probably have a talk with you later. It's quite interesting what you said about being, as a person who's mixed myself, if I go to Spain, I don't feel very Spanish at all. But in Britain, I feel more Spanish here than I do when I'm in Spain. Yeah, so I get what you're saying in that context. But what I wanted to sort of say is, we're a global economy, but we're not global as societies. So although our economic structure, financial structure, and etc. is global, we're not really global as a community in accepting people. When someone said about open, the world is open. It's open if you've got a visa. It's open if you're allowed in that country and there isn't a ban. It's open, but the people aren't necessarily open either. And just on, I think, your point when you were saying about Britishness, I struggle to understand the concept of Britishness because there isn't anyone who's British. It's either you're mixed. I mean, for example, Vikings are Norwegian, Anglo-Saxons are German. You have French people that also invaded the country. So I struggle to understand what Britishness is. To me, Britishness is international. We have so many different things from so many different countries, partially because of colonialization, slavery, and things like that. We've taken from other countries. Now, this country doesn't have an identity as such that is British. It's international, to me personally.
Yeah, DNA mapping of the country is very interesting. Emily has looked at that. I'd like to come back because I don't think we fully, I mean, some people have answered the questions, but not everybody. So, Damian, I really want to come back to you because you said that Theresa May had not specified anything about the trade programme. But just as a matter of principle, how comfortable are you with having trade negotiations or having a trade agreement with countries with poor human rights records?
Well, I don't have any hard-line opinion. I think that's what you're fishing for. We don't seem to have a problem with it at the moment. Obviously, we fly the flag above Buckingham Palace at half-mast when the Saudi royal family comes along. So, wasn't really thinking about it. You should have told me to think about it.
Okay. So
I've really got a thought about it.
So let me just ask the same question in a slightly different way. So we were quite happy to have, let's say, the Premier of China address the House of Commons and the House of Lords. But we were less happy, or so the Speaker of the House was less happy to have Donald Trump. Is that correct?
It's virtue signalling, and I'm sorry to use an alt-right buzzword, but that's what it is. It's just, that's all it is. I mean, you've got to, if you're a politician and you have these opinions, these beliefs on human rights and things like that, first thing, you have to be consistent with it, and politicians aren't consistent. Well, I don't like politicians, but so they're not. You have to be consistent as a first principle before you can start moralising about Donald Trump. Because the idea that, say, John Bercow sits there pretending he's the perfect Christian and he's completely tolerant, you know, everybody's got vices. So I think a bit sick of that. That's the thing I've really got to say about it.
Okay, I'm going to go very quickly down the panel and then I'll come to the audience. Very quickly as we go through. Trump, Speaker, yes or no?
No.
You can give a quick reason if you want.
The US funds and sponsors terrorism. The Muslim ban is against country that funds and sponsors terrorism. So we should do what the US is doing to other countries.
No, I could never agree with a racist.
Sorry, but I lost the question. Do you mind repeating it?
Do you think it's appropriate to invite Trump to speak to the House of Commons, House of Lords, given the history we have of bringing world leaders, often with dubious civil rights records?
Well, personally, I would like to stay away from this man as much as I can and make him stand away from the United Kingdom and at the same time also Europe as a whole. But on the other hand, well, we have to more or less assume that he's the president. It's something really bad. I'm really, really sad about this. But let's try to make the least harm out of it.
So you're saying honor the office?
Yes, I mean, we have to live with it. I don't believe that by having like a negation attitude, we're going to move any further. We can't say, oh, no, we don't want to have anything to do with him. Well, I think that we should try to work together, but definitely never let him or his government take too much power. I mean, if we are having a relationship with them, don't letting them have the dominant party.
Okay.
The dominant party.
Quick explanation, I did say. Go ahead.
I agree in part with you there. I do agree. I think it would be... I don't think it's a good idea to have Trump here, but I think he should. Because if we can lay out on the table how we feel about somebody, if we just spout out in the streets, it'll work to a point. But if you get that man in front of the people who represent the constituencies, and most of them hate him and his views, then he can be held accountable to his views. If you just don't allow them here, they can just disregard our view. If they come here and we are against him, he has to answer the fact. So, the Muslim ban. Why? What is the legal and human right that he thinks he can oppress for that ban? And another point is, he's already gone against what he said to the British government, as a quick point, about a British citizen who was refused entry, and he was a teacher in a school in Wales. I cannot remember his name. He was refused entry into America. He has a British passport, but because he is a Muslim, he was refused entry. He got to Reykjavik, and the American embassy in Reykjavik escorted him off the plane and out of the airport and put him on another plane and sent him back home. That's already going against protocol, because he said there will be no effect on British travel.
Zsófia.
Yeah, personally, I don't support his policy. I can't really accept him as a leader, but I do think that we should invite him to debate and try to cooperate with him.
Very good.
Yeah, he should come. I think what's quite funny is some people have a very unrealistic high opinion of Britain, as if it still can strut around on the global stage as if it's incredibly rich and incredibly prosperous. It's not incredibly rich. It's not incredibly prosperous, and you shouldn't try and bite a hand that wants to feed you. As far as I can see.
Okay, do we have views from the audience on this? This man at the back and then this lady here. So I'll go to the back first.
Britain throughout history, well, Luke said that human rights is incredibly important to Britain, but throughout history it's always taken a back step to trade. We fundamentally set up the slave trade. We're still selling weapons to the Saudis, which are being used in Yemen. So I don't think human rights has ever been a priority for us in terms of trade. And also the fact that people don't feel British, I think that's one of the failings of multiculturalism. Trying to give everyone an identity has just fundamentally failed, which could have been leading up to these hate crimes we were talking about at the start of the debate.
Okay, this lady here in front of you.
I think it's really easy sometimes to take someone like Donald Trump, who is an entirely unpalatable creature, and then to try and justify what the UK government does in comparison. So, for example, it's very easy for a lot of people in the UK to pretend that the policies that we as a country have are not that different from what he has. So, like the repealment of the Dubs Agreement, things like that. It's extremely easy to rally against someone like Trump by being entirely uncritical of your own government, uncritical of the way that the UK and European countries treat migrants and refugees. detention centres fundamentally are against people's human rights. And I think it's really easy when you have someone like Trump coming over and you can say he's a monster, he's homophobic, he's racist. If you look at what the state does to refugees once they come to the UK looking for refuge, it's disgusting, essentially. And I think it's very easy for people to say that once you come to Europe, things are easy. Like, indefinite detention and removal of people is against people's human rights. And I think that everyone needs to look more critically at what their government is doing with regards to the refugee crisis, especially once people have come into the country, basically.
Thank you. We had the gentleman over there at the back.
To go back to the actual question, which was whether Trump should come here or not, I think the point is not whether he should come, it's the point of whether he should talk in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, which is a privilege that has only been given to Mandela and Obama in the last 30 years. But I do think he should come over just for the entertainment value of him trying to do one of his speeches in front of what are 427 intelligent human beings. To put him in front of all the MPs to do one of his speeches would actually just be quite entertaining, and it would show him up for what he is, which is a ridiculous person.
I don't think racism is an entertainment. I'm sorry, it's disgusting, and I do not want him to say anything here, because we're giving a space for these people to spew hatred. Like when we did with Katie Hopkins to call refugee cockroaches, what is that doing? It's not entertainment at all.
Anybody else on the panel?
Is it on? I don't, that's obviously deplorable, but I think he is quite an entertaining figure, discounting that. I mean, because the whole principle, I think, of the gentleman's question is that you think he's probably going to embarrass himself a little bit, and that's why it'd be funny, because he's going to say things like that. And Britain, this is the fundamental part of free speech. We're going to see him, and if you disagree with him and he makes a fool of himself, all of Britain will see it clearly. That's why he needs to speak. You can't just tell him to go away, because no one, you can
Free speech comes with responsibility.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. With any responsibilities
I'm
or
sorry,
restrictions
you need to be
at all.
responsible.
Not at all. Well, I did just shut her down, so that's...
Alternative facts.
Just to put my sixpence into the mix. If you disregard people and pretend they don't exist, it just doesn't work. If you look at somebody and say, oh, we don't like what you say, I don't like a lot of what most politicians say, but I don't just say, oh, go away and leave office.
It's not what I said.
It's necessary. And as well, you say about this thing. If you get somebody, is Katie Hopkins, as vile a thing she is she does get people talking on both sides of the argument as well, and it's usually the positive side of the argument comes through. When she was talking about Maddie McCann recently, I know it's not exactly political, saying that Maddie McCann was not taken, she was left to be found. That's a disgusting comment, and especially with what happened. But if you don't get the people who are putting the other opinion and you only say everything's sunshine and roses, that isn't the full view. You need both sides of an argument to argue.
This gentleman at the back here, in the middle.
Just to go back to the question about whether we should invite Donald Trump over, I totally agree with your point made over there that it isn't funny to joke about racism and make it an entertainment factor. However, I also agree with what Luke said in that we do need to invite him over here so that we can challenge his views. If you just ignore him, pretend that he doesn't exist, and just completely disrespect his argument, then we aren't going to get the debate going. We aren't going to try and persuade him otherwise. And, there have been people that have argued that because some people on the left, perhaps, have just completely ignored what people on the right have said, some people have argued that that is the cause of what has given risen to Donald Trump. We need to hear people with these ridiculous views so that we can talk some reason into them. And I'm absolutely for Donald Trump coming over. I think whether he should speak in the House of Commons, that is debatable. But we do need to bring him over here so that we can talk to him, challenge him, and basically set him right, to be honest.
This man here.
I don't know. I think when people say, oh, we should be inviting him over because we should challenge his views, I think you automatically lose the argument when you engage in it. So, for example, like on certain arguments, let's say like someone was to attack a rape victim, or if someone was to say something about Jews or during the 1930s, or maybe they are a bit swarthy, you don't want to engage in it because it's just inherently wrong. You almost already lose the argument when you're kind of engaged in it. That's what I personally think.
This man over the far side.
Quickly to reply to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that when someone is one of the most powerful men on earth, you have probably to engage into that because he will do bad stuff anyways. So, I mean, if it was like a harmless person, okay, you can avoid the confrontation. But with someone so powerful that will cause a lot of damage, then I think that that is a different case where you should actually search this confrontation.
Right. So the things he represents, I think we've been fighting them for centuries, right? And I don't know how he got elected and became a president. Maybe he gave voices to the views that were suppressed and kept aside for a very long time, where we reaped the benefits of economic globalization. And now we see, oh, it's all gone the wrong way, we're losing our identity. Well, I think we're just humans, but whatever identity we have, imagined communities we are part of. So, I don't know, I don't see the point of him coming here or talking to anyone, but every president must meet him because that's where all the money is. And we want our people to benefit, or at least let's not be part of the coal industry coming back up. I would say that's not right. I don't know. I can't even say if he should, like, the Indian Prime Minister already met him and they had a conversation over the phone. So I think they're good buddies now, or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'd like to pick up on a theme that has emerged both in some of the things people have said and also in the main debate. So on the one hand, Trump is quite isolationist, and he's talking about restricting people coming in. He's about renegotiating trade agreements, and we had a similar kind of theme in the Brexit debate about the need to help parts of the British community who hadn't done so well under globalization. And yet, on the other hand, we're talking about negotiating new trade agreements with people around the world. How do we square those two arguments? And let's start with Damian on the far side there. How do you square the argument on the one hand?
Sorry, I didn't hear the end of the question, sorry.
So how do we square on the one hand the suggestion that the European single market and globalization had disadvantaged parts of the community in the UK, and on the other hand, look to renegotiate or negotiate trade agreements with the rest of the world? Why will that make it different? How will that help the people of Sunderland, for example?
Well, if you're talking about coastal towns, the common fisheries policy, well, obviously Britain used to have a very thriving fishing industry. This is just one example. I know you mentioned Sunderland. Obviously, it's not the same everywhere else. But that's one reason why leaving the European Union would be beneficial, because you can't just withdraw from one single policy. I didn't understand what you meant by terms of squaring it. I didn't quite get your point. Maybe I'm just thick. I don't want to.
Well, if globalization was hurting the people of Sunderland, how does going for negotiating a whole set of new trade agreements across the world help them?
I don't know everything, man.
Okay. Anybody else like to pick up that balance? Luke?
I'd like to answer to your first question. I believe that this message of protectionism and nationalism that a lot of these groups have been promoting is just a fake lie to the working class, who believed that someone like Donald Trump and his cabinet full of millionaires would be working for the interests of the working class. Who believed that? It still surprises me, but I truly believe that all this idea of protectionism, nationalism, has been totally inverted, and to manipulate the interests of the working class by saying, oh, we'll bring back those jobs. those jobs are long gone. And even if you bring them back, the problem is that the people in the power now are the people that own those businesses. And by definition, the interests of the working class are different from those of the business owners. How do you expect a cabinet in the US formed by CEOs of very important companies, oil companies, how do you expect that they are going to protect the interests of the white or black or any color working class? It's totally absurd. So that is it.
Anybody else want to pick up that issue?
No, I don't think everybody necessarily believes in the left view of the working class, which I think we're getting. I'm not having a go, I'm just saying. It's good you've come on to Trump's actual issues, because I'd say a lot of all the anger and what we've been talking about earlier, not letting them speak, that's all the macro stuff. And the micro stuff, if you talk about, I have the notes on it here, hang on, let me find it. I had a load of notes on, so the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, the leader of that, Scott Pruitt, he was exposed. I think it was The Hill. I haven't got it down. It was The Hill, the online news outlet, exposed his links with the oil and gas industry, which obviously it's a very common thing in America. But he's got self-interest. The Milton Friedman idea of institutions have their own self-interest. And the worst one of all, which is a violation of the Fifth Amendment. I'm not just reading my notes. The violation of the Fifth Amendment, which is civil asset forfeiture, where if the police suspect you of a crime, you're not convicted, they have the right to seize your property. And I think we do stand ourselves in good stead if we focused on issues like that rather than big, broad, free speech issues, which I think most people understand the principle of why you should come to Britain. The dirt and the politics is what we need to refocus on and get out of our head all these big, grandiose ideas about whatever. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, this man here wanted to come in. Yeah?
Hello? Talking about the working class. The working class, in some respects, I think, in this time in history, they feel like they've been left behind. They feel like their voices are not being heard to, and a lot of, for example, white working class in Britain have some problems with immigration because they feel like communities that have come in have surpassed them and they've been left behind. And so I feel like the right, at the moment, the populist right, has some sort of answer, or at least they're addressing it. I think on the regressive left, which is not the whole left, I think it's an element of the left, have put these people down saying they're racist and things like that. And I think this is why Corbyn, he's meant to be a man for the working class, but he's minus 30% in opinion polls. And I think I do agree with your comment about Trump and the millionaires. I don't think they really do have their interests at heart. But I think the populist right across Europe as a whole and the US has found a way to tap into that working class, that the left, because they are just brandishing people with these broad brushes and are not representative and want to push these issues aside, have been left behind.
Yeah, I totally get your point, but I believe that in any country, the enemy of the working class, or the power that is directly influencing the working class, is the business owner, is the owner of the capital. So because those business owners are very often those that control the media and control the public opinions, they have been able to redirect the anger and the dissatisfaction of the working class towards this minority. But because also, even if it is subconsciously, it is easier to focus your anger against a minority and the group. It is easier to blame them than to blame the entire system in which you are only a very little person in a system of very powerful corporations. So you will tend to like more that idea, even if it is a train of thought that is subconscious. You will think that is more likely to go, and this is what these right-wing parties have. This opportunity is what they have seized. But on another hand, I do believe that it is very important to bear in mind that it is particularly those business owners that are controlling effectively most of the media, that are leading to this demonization of the immigrants. And very often it is not that the immigrants have come here and taken our jobs. It is just that those business owners have decided to delocalize their industrial production to underdeveloped countries where they can exploit Labour. So again, the problem comes from the top. It is not from the person who comes here. The problem comes from the top.
Okay. Max, I mean, what's the situation in Germany? Are the left losing influence in the same way they've lost influence perhaps in the US and in the UK?
In Germany, it's a kind of exception now because the left is winning support, huge support. The Social Democratic Party has a new candidate who challenges Angela Merkel for the chancellorship. And actually, last year we thought, okay, we are facing a crisis as a party, as a left-wing party, that people don't believe in us anymore. But now this development has shown that people definitely look for alternatives to conservative or right-wing governments.
Zsófia, I mean, Hungary is often perceived as being quite right-wing amongst the new European states. What's the status of the left v right there?
Well, it's quite a difficult question in the case of Hungary because we don't really have, well, we do have left parties, but they are not really powerful, and our whole political system is controlled by the right wing currently. So it's quite difficult to make a point about the left side.
Okay. So Damian, I mean, do you feel that UKIP is now the new voice of the left or the working class in Britain?
Well, from my own experience, because I've been with UKIP a long time, I've done a lot of campaigning, I've met a lot of people. It's all changed now, though. I think the party's probably going to crumble. I'm not, I'm not delusionary because its main purpose has been expired. But for the most part, everybody that in the Nottingham branch and in the branches I met at the conferences, a lot of them were from old Labour backgrounds. Although the party did, because it was a party and it stood in national elections, it had to flesh out policies for areas that I don't think the party was particularly interested in. So it had to come up with tax systems and things like that. It was mainly a single single purpose party. So no, I don't think UKIP will be. But the point I was making, that you made earlier, madam, because I forgot your name, was you said that was business is the enemy of the working class, was the phrase you used. But if a working class man does have an idea or a venture that he thinks is going to sell well, where does that man go? He doesn't go to the state. The state's not going to give him a grant for a business venture. He goes to the banks for finance. Where does the finance come from? It comes from jobs. And also, where does the tax that supports a welfare system under a quasi-socialist state, where does it come from? It comes from business. It doesn't, and borrowing as well. Well, that'll eventually catch up on itself and plunge the nation into despair, as we've seen.
Well, it comes much more from just the pockets of the taxpayers, and very often it is the small and medium enterprises that are effectively paying a much higher proportion than the multinational corporations that are evading a lot of taxes and then are paying a ridiculous amount for the huge profits that they are making. And you can argue that there has some benefits in the system where we're currently living in, capitalism as a whole, but as a person that has got a job, there is still this fight of what are the interests of the business owner and what are the interests of, and I'm speaking business owner and a capitalist owner against the interests of the working class. I'm not speaking about the owner of the little corner shop. I am speaking about the people that manage and own the big corporation that are actually the ones that are so powerful that they rule politics, they rule the economic policies. All the treaties of trade agreement, all those treaties are made in very close, trying to favor these type of companies, and they are the ones that I am talking about.
Is somebody morally obliged to pay tax? You're forced to pay tax. You're not morally obliged to do it, so if you want to try and find a way out of the system, that seems perfectly legitimate. And at the end of the day, you're funding a government or a government that naturally you disagree with, policies that you might disagree with, so I don't see why there's any obligation to pay tax. The idea that you can avoid it seems to me to be perfectly rational.
Well, I think that, okay, again, this can be a personal view, but I think that if we're living in a state in which we are benefiting from public healthcare, public education, public services, roads, then we do have this moral and legal obligation to pay taxes.
I have a question on the list here which we haven't come to, and that was, did Trump lose his legitimacy to hold the presidential office when he refused to release his tax returns? So you're basically saying that there's no obligation on him to not only to release his tax returns, but to pay tax.
You, or anybody, any individual, do they like the government that's currently elected? I'm sure there's a lot of Labour supporters and a lot of supporters of other parties. They don't like them. So why should they feel they're obliged to pay tax? No one voluntarily pays tax. It's a complete misframing of the issue, in my opinion. I don't see why nobody's morally obliged to pay tax. It's ridiculous.
But what is the other option then? Not having any taxes, just eliminating the state, no public health at all, no public services at all.
Some people do disagree with you. I'm not a radical capitalist like Ayn Rand or something like that. But some people do disagree with you. And the point is, it's not that we're investing in the systems, it's that the current policy doesn't work. So currently, at the moment, we plunge money into the NHS, not as much as we used to, but it hasn't solved the problem. So what I'm saying is, while our policy is being pursued that is ineffectual, perhaps to support something like healthcare, why should someone feel morally obliged to, what is it saying? Because we've seen it, putting money just down the drain. Why should someone feel obliged to pay tax?
Well, I think that if people feel dissatisfied, they should engage more into politics and trying to have a more active paper in population. But just what is the alternative to not paying taxes, not having a state at all? That would be horrific, particularly because then the people who do have the money would pay for their own private healthcare, their own private education, but the vast majority of people would be totally left outside in the system. So the problem is that I do have an alternative for the problem that you are saying, and is engaging more in politics, trying to work to changing the things that are not working correctly at the moment. But you don't have any alternative to a system in which we have no taxes.
Well, if you say that people are morally and legally should be legally obliged to pay tax, then by the very nature you have to have a coherent policy in place and a fully functional system for all the social care that you want to provide.
I think we've moved away from a debate about the global world into one about the political systems, which I want to move back to. Does anybody in the audience have a burning question they want to bring up? So.
Right. We're talking about tax. That's what it was about, tax. So we have, because it's a global world now, we have almost 3.5 billion people who live below poverty line now. We're 7.5, almost. So, and these people live below poverty line, which means they make less than $2.25 a day. I think they need healthcare, at least, if not more money, because money has no value anymore. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I can just extend that question. There's a debate in the moment in the country about the level of development funding that we make. And so really following on that question, what's our obligation to help poor countries to tackle poverty versus spending on the money, whether that be in the UK or the US? So, Neiry, do you want to go first?
We have a moral obligation as Britain, who was once a colonizing power. Africa, Asia, South America, all the global south are literally underdeveloped, you could argue, based on the history of this country, and you cannot just disregard that. Poverty is a system. No, it's not. It's man-made. And interestingly, I think we have a moral duty to help poorer countries, not only because of our colonial power, but on a human level.
Max, did you want to?
We have to help those countries, but the question is, how are we helping those countries? Not just by spending money, we have to invest in these countries that they are able to develop on their own at the end.
Just saying it's nice to agree with the socialists that just plunging money into things doesn't always solve the problem. It's nice to see that the left has got the act together on that.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear that. And I think it's about...
You are? I didn't hear you, sorry, what?
No, I didn't hear your question. Do you mind repeating it? Oh, your comment. I didn't hear it.
Repeat your comment.
Sorry. I said it's nice to see that a socialist has finally realised that just plunging money into something mindlessly won't solve the problem, and you have to study policy and how you implement it, how you spend the money. It's just nice to see the left's got its act together, is what I said.
Zsófia, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, Yeah, I think that we should support them. It's a human responsibility.
Sorry, your mic isn't on. Hang on a second. Can we get that mic on?
Anyone can hear now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Hello?
So I just said that it's a moral responsibility, I guess, to help the poorer countries because it could stop the spread of diseases and so many important things. So yeah, we should support.
I agree here with him. You need to invest. You need to not give the money to government because a lot of the governments in the most poorest countries are corrupt, severely corrupt. You need to put it into the industry. You need to create manufacture. You need to create industry. You need to. If you start off by building universities without schools, you're not going to be able to get anybody to teach in those schools. You need to start from the basis and build from the ground up. You can't just pour money at the top and say distribute evenly. You have to directify it, put it into where it's needed, which at the moment in most of the poverty, most countries with the highest poverty, is in infrastructure, manufacturing, and education.
And I would like to add to that apart from giving money, we have to just stop financing their wars and their violence and military conflicts in those African countries, in those Middle Eastern countries. We have to stop selling arms to those people, and then we can think about building schools, making dwells, and things like that. But as long as we're still financing those conflicts, we cannot speak about giving aid for development.
Max, oh, you already spoken, so sorry. Does anybody in the audience want to take up on this? Cameraman at the back.
So it's kind of two things, really. As a Bruneian-born person who holds an Australian passport who identifies as Scottish, am I not the definition of an open world? And the second thing being mostly kind of what's being picked up on by a lot of the left-leaning members. I sort of identify with what Luke said earlier in somewhat. A lot of the things that left people tend to be saying is that we're paying back for things we've done in the past, things that as a nation we've caused some injustices or some sort of thing like that. At what point do we stop paying for those injustices? Because it's hundreds of years ago now. And, like, it's easy for me to say, and it's very easy to play the you're white, you don't know card, but ultimately we've been, 100 years separated completely from any other nation? Nearing on? Like, what time do we stop paying reparations to the countries that admittedly we've destabilised a few along the way, but, like, some countries that I mentioned, we've talked about funding rebels. What would your system be if we didn't fund rebels? Because we either send soldiers to help fund them, or we prolong it by keeping it political. So would you prefer a shorter war with more soldiers, or a longer war with more politics involved?
I agree there.
I think it's interesting when we discuss about reparations, or whatever you like to call it. When it's not thousands and thousands or hundreds of years ago, I think people like to take away of the history and pretend it happened so many years ago. Some people's grandparents witnessed slavery. You know, this is still present, and these systems continue till this day. Racism still exists. People are still disadvantaged because of the injustices we committed. So, of course, we have to do something about it. We can't just disregard it because it happened thousands of years. It didn't. You know, the civil rights movement in America, 1960s, people are still being killed by the police. These things are still occurring, so it's really easy to disregard it because we don't want to take responsibility or because we were not alive in that certain year. But the systems carry on, and some of us still benefit from those same systems.
I have a point to raise. It was reparations after World War I that led to the rise of National Socialism, also known as Nazism in Germany, which led to the rise of one of the biggest atrocities that's ever happened. You have to be able to make sure that if... I don't agree with the idea that simply because England was a colonial power, we have to support for the rest of our lives as a sort of eternal sorry. I don't agree with that.
Add to this.
You obviously don't like the history of Britain very much. You think it was a nasty nation to other nations. Would you agree with that?
You invaded 95%
Okay, yeah.
of the
So
world.
so you agree with it? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's be consistent. Okay. If all the Englishmen and Englishwomen in here are still responsible for colonialism,
I do not hold an individual just because they're white responsible for racism.
Let me finish my point.
Let him speak,
Let me
then we'll
finish
come
my
back.
point. If we are still responsible for that, then there is a member of this panel that is still responsible for something he had no part in. And it was one of the most deplorable acts of the 20th century. It is ridiculous. Would you condemn him as well and say he's responsible for that? It's ridiculous.
Not hold responsibility on an individual. It is a system that some still privileged from. Acknowledge it.
I acknowledge World War II. I didn't live through World War II. My granddad did. My granddad watched the British hydrogen bombs go off in Christmas Island because of what happened in the war. Doesn't mean that every day I have to think I have to be nice to everyone because we were part of World War II. You have to look at things. I'm not a traditionalist in that sense. The war happened. It was a terrible atrocity. It killed millions on millions of people in every country that was involved in it. And there are still issues associated with what happened during the war. But we need to look forwards now. We need to draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we are now, not what we were 70 years ago now. My granddad, for example, was in the war. He fought in the war. But he doesn't wake up every day and say, I've got to be nice to X because they might have been in the war. He just lives his life and he's moved on. That was his past, now this is his future.
Racism is not, I've hurt your feelings, it's a structure, it's a system. It continues to disadvantage certain people. That's what I am saying. In order for us to progress, we need to acknowledge these systems and acknowledge that you, as a white man, walk this earth differently to me. And we cannot overcome this unless we acknowledge the disadvantages and the oppression that exists.
So we're different because of the colour of our skin then?
Forward.
We're different because of the colour of our skin then?
Sorry?
The colour of our skin determines that it makes us different, does it, in some way?
Of course, we walk this earth differently. There are systems that privilege you and don't privilege me. I wouldn't get a job because I'm a Muslim. You would. You know, if...
So you say.
But it's true.
So you say.
Racism is not a figment of my imagination.
Evidence. Provide...
Muslim man.
You've both had your say. Okay, I've got two questions at the back, so the two ladies there, and then I'll come to this man here. And then I've got another lady here as well. Sorry.
The idea of white privilege is very interesting. It is something, obviously, that exists. I, as a English female on both sides, as far as I can possibly, I understand that there is white privilege, but there seems to be on the panel a generalisation that we don't understand. I am disabled. I have had my own problems getting a job, getting it. Anyone that is slightly better than me will get a job. It's quite interesting that there seems to be across the panel that the white doesn't understand. My life is different, and I acknowledge that. But we're not all the same, and there is a few generalisations from every single one of you in very different ways. And it was just something I wanted to clarify.
Just quickly to add, when they say about me as a white male, I know what poverty is. I don't look like it currently, but I've lived in poverty when we didn't have the money to pay our rent on the house that we owned. We didn't have money to pay the mortgage off. I remember not eating for days at a time because of it. I remember going to school with, it sounds disgusting to say it, with my underwear turned inside out because we hadn't got the money to pay for the electricity to put them in the washing machine and pay for the washing machine. I have been through those times. I know what it is like to be in poverty. But I fought through it. I got through it. My family got through it. And we're okay now. So generalising, saying that it's X, Y, and Z isn't the best thing to do when you don't know the people's background. My background is not of a middle-class, upper-class person. I come from a working-class background. My granddad worked in the factory. My great-granddad worked down in the pit. But I don't justify what happened from the upper classes taking all the money away from me. It was just a product of what I lived in at the time, what I had to suffer through. I've suffered through it, and I feel I'm a better person for it. I don't walk past people in the street who are poor and go, ooh, you're poor. I understand what they feel. I mean, I've never been homeless, so I will never understand what it's like to be homeless. Doesn't mean I don't have sympathy with it.
I've got some.
I am human.
Yeah. So I've got this lady, and then this lady here who hasn't spoken at all yet had her hand up.
Okay,
So-
I just wanted to bring it back to reparations a second, because what really interests me is that none of the indigenous people have had reparations. My family, so Taino Indians, you've got Aztecs, you've got the Mayans, you've got Arawak Indians, you've got Native American Indians, the people that should be there, but let's not talk about that. What reparations and what things did they receive from the mass genocides that have happened to them and continue to happen? The segregation is still, in my point of view, is still as bad, just not as recorded or as talked about as much as other people's struggles and reparations that they need and they deserve. If that makes sense. If that sounded a bit crazy.
Do you want to answer that briefly while the microphone's coming here?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you look at the Holocaust, a lot of Jewish members were, they received reparations, you know, and they deserved it. If your entire people have been put through a genocide, slavery, oppression, and even gassed, you deserve the reparations because you were purposely underdeveloped. And essentially, I don't know, it's just how can you not?
Okay, this lady here.
I'd like to say on the side of reparations as well, I do not think there's a way in which reparations can be given fully. There is in no way that the things that have been done, that there is no way we can make it better, but we can acknowledge what happened and what is still happening, because this has not moved on. We can say slavery came and went, and this is not a long time ago. We can say the Holocaust came and went, but there are things that are still being done. There's systems that still keep going. I'll give an example of maybe Africa and the Europe. For example, there's some countries that were colonized by France that have to pay a certain amount of money to France every year. And these are countries that are struggling already. So there is no such thing as, I can't say there is such thing as reparations, rather than more humanitarian acts, and acts that want to develop rather than keep enslaving. Because aid, for example, can keep enslaving people. It's just taking money, giving it to them, or giving them food for today. Tomorrow, that money will go away, and that food will go away. What are you giving them to sustain them? So I think there is no such thing as reparations. We can try, do our best, but the best thing is to acknowledge what has been done, what is being done, and then we can move forward from there. Yeah.
Thank you. I think this man was next, and then I've got this lady, and then that man.
Is it not slightly discriminatory to assume that because someone's white, that they've benefited from what I think every white person here would admit was an egregious crime? And secondly, should certain actors within the slave trade, for example, you had black tribes who captured other black tribes and sold them off into slavery, should they have to pay reparations? And we still have a slave trade today in this world, in the Arab world, to black Africans. Should the Arabs have to pay reparations or for slavery? Should every single Arab, every single white person, etc.?
Well, I think that all these help and donation that we're speaking about should not be made only because of the colonial past of some of the nations in Europe, but mainly because people are dying, people are in poverty, people don't have access to healthcare. This is something that we have got the moral responsibility to fight for. And we have got the means, we are rich. How come that we have got 2 cars per family and several televisions? We throw away 1/3 of all the food that is produced. How can we say that we don't have the means to help these people in poverty?
And in addition to that, we have to be aware of the fact that all countries of the European Union are highly making use of development countries in Africa, for instance, yeah, by exporting products to these countries that are less expensive than those products, those domestic products.
Can I just, sorry, I don't know your name, but interesting point in regarding the Arab world. Yes, slavery exists till this day. It was only in 2000, I forgot the date, that the Arab, I think it was Saudi, that banned slavery. So of course that's very interesting. And, you know, yes, true, very true. And I think it's easy to disregard as, yeah, we don't earn reparations because black people enslaved their kind. But when you look at World War II, it was mostly white nations fighting each other. So do you understand the logic that you cannot just disregard it like that? Because it's real and it still affects me. And white privilege is real. That's why black people in America get killed simply because of their color. This is why a lot of countries that are underdeveloped is not... that are from the global south, that are black and brown, because racism was invented and it still is a part of a system that privileges people. And in regards to Luke's previous points, yes, you may walk this earth different to me, you will walk this earth different to a white, rich person. We need to understand that it's not just race that is different, gender, sexuality, everything. Our identity is intersectional, and we need to understand that we will all walk this earth differently. Like I would to a disabled person, I have more privilege than a disabled person would, but it is not hurtful to acknowledge these privileges. It does not make you a bad person. It only means that's the only way we can actually move forward. Because I still have a lot of privilege to what a black person would have. And it doesn't mean that, oh, I'm a bad person. It means that I acknowledge that if I was to stand in America, I would not be shot for my skin color, but a black person probably would.
This lady here.
I think it's so easy for a white person to say that white privilege doesn't exist because you live in the footsteps of being privileged every single day. And I think, yes, as a white person, you may experience poverty, but you'll never experience, here in Britain, as a white male, you will never experience racism, you'll never experience the inequality that somebody else does. And I think you do need to acknowledge that white males are so privileged in this country, and you will never acknowledge that you benefit so much compared to others.
The idea that you can assert an entire race's personal lives, it just seems to me, how could you ever gain enough information to support that? It doesn't make any sense.
Have you ever experienced racism towards yourself?
Yeah, I've experienced it at school. My sister is currently suffering from a terrible drug habit as well. You don't know me. You can't say a whole
drug habit has nothing to do with it. I'm talking about racism, inequality. And if me and you went for the same job, would you get the job or would I get the job? Would you more likely be a politician or me? As a white Muslim, am I likely to get a job?
Yeah, I'd employ.
Would you?
Yeah.
Sure.
So you're just saying I'm wrong. It's just a case of, oh, you're wrong, I'm right. You're wrong, I'm right. This is why you're not allowed to do this sort of thing in court. You have to provide evidence before you assert anything.
Damian, I think that
gentleman
if we
behind
simply...
you. Sorry, this gentleman here with his hand up. Yep.
I think a lot of it's to do with class issues as well. Like, for example, it was a really brilliant point what Luke made as well. So, for example, what Black Lives Matter does, and I think quite rightly, like they point in certain states in America that blacks on average die younger than whites. But when you look at poor whites and poor blacks, it's the same young age. I think that's something that really has to unify, for example, Black Lives Matter with poor white people. They have similar issues as well, and I don't necessarily think they should be pitted against each other. So it's a system that...
Thank you.
Disproportionate.
Right, I think we've time for one last question.
Yeah, moving on a little bit from that. Just a general quick question to the panel. Should Donald Trump's personal Twitter account be deleted?
Am I starting this?
Yeah, you can.
If we blocked Azealia Banks, why are we not blocked Katie Hopkins, Donald Trump, and the long list of people that spew hatred?
We go on the line.
I'm afraid I very, very rarely use Twitter, so I very rarely see all the claptrap that he spouts. But if free speech is free in the world, for me, in my opinion, if everybody can have a say, then they should be able to say. It doesn't matter what forum it can be. It could be in person or it could be on social media. It's just I think social media often gives people the opportunity to be a little bit more upfront, which I think is the issue with social media.
Zsófia, do you have a view?
I don't think that his account should be deleted because it shows that he and his administration don't really have the competence to govern.
Damian?
Yeah, why don't we just suppress everything? Why don't we just suppress everything we disagree with? Because that seems to be the consensus at the moment. Well, I disagree that I think it should be, just for entertainment value alone, it should remain. But it's not even written by him, which is quite strange. Does anyone know that? He has an aide that writes all the tweets for him, which may explain why the tweets are a little bit more coherent than he is sometimes.
Max?
The problem is not Trump himself, the problem, not Twitter itself, the problem is Trump. Will we delete his Twitter account? He might use Facebook or what else. The American people have to get rid of him.
And the last word.
Oof, what a big responsibility. Well, just in general, I do believe in freedom of speech, definitely. And you're not doing any favor to democracy if you're trying to silence anyone, because their anger and their ideas are not going to disappear. But I do believe that freedom of speech ends when it starts to discriminate to another person, or where it is actually causing a harm to another person. So I do think that perhaps there should be a kind of filter onto the Twitter account if we're speaking about that. But in general, about freedom of speech, I do believe that there have to be some limits in it. I can't go on the street and shout, kill this minority, kill this type of people. I think that there are some limits to freedom of speech.
Okay, well, thank you very much to everybody for coming along tonight. I think, particularly thank you to the audience. I think you've been wonderful participants. I think we've seen a lot of interesting points made. I think everything I've heard fills me with confidence in the ability of the people in the audience and on the panel, and it's good to see that we will have healthy debate running into the future. So if we could ask the audience to thank the panel members in particular in the usual way.